All right, let's dive into a really fascinating piece of literary detective work today. We're going to look at how one famous critic, F.R. Leavis, took a Charles Dickens novel that most people had forgotten about and made this absolutely shocking argument that it was actually his greatest masterpiece.
So let me start by asking you a question. When you think of Charles Dickens, what pops into your head? A Christmas Carol, probably. Great Expectations, Oliver Twist. But what if his most brilliant, most perfectly built novel was one you've barely even heard of? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to try and piece together today.
So the whole story really kicks off in 1948. Our key player is this hugely influential critic, F.R. Leavis, and he decides to turn his attention to Hard Times, a novel that up to that point was pretty much seen as one of Dickens's lesser works. And what he had to say about it, well, it sent some serious ripples through the literary world.
And here it is. This was his big claim. I mean, listen to that. Leavis didn't just say the book was pretty good or, underrated. He called it a completely serious work of art that captured all the strength of Dickens's genius in one place. That's a massive statement, right? So the big question is, how on earth could everyone else have missed it?
And that brings us to the first part of Leavis's argument. He basically said the problem wasn't that the novel was misunderstood, it was that it was being completely misread. See, critics were showing up expecting one thing, and Hard Times was giving them something totally, radically different.
Leavis's diagnosis was actually pretty simple. He said critics were expecting that classic, sprawling, kind of chaotic Dickens world, full of what he called redundant life. But Hard Times wasn't like that at all. It was tight. It was a perfectly organized whole where every single piece, every character, had a specific symbolic job to do. It's like they went in expecting a messy soap opera, and instead they were handed a perfectly structured poem.
So if it's not your typical sprawling novel, then what is it? Well, Leavis had a name for it. He said the secret to understanding Hard Times is to stop reading it as a regular novel and start seeing it for what it truly is, a moral fable.
Now, moral fable might sound a little academic, but the idea is pretty straightforward. In a fable, the author isn't hiding the ball. Leavis says the intention is peculiarly insistent. Basically, the message is front and center. Every character, every scene is there to represent some bigger idea. The whole story is working on this deeply symbolic level.
What this means is that in Hard Times, there is zero fat. There are no wasted words, no random side characters just for fun. Every single element is a carefully, meticulously chosen piece of a giant argument Dickens is making about the very soul of industrial society.
Okay, it's a great theory, but where's the proof? Well, Leavis says you can find it everywhere, especially in the novel's central conflict. He frames the whole book as this epic battle between two opposing ways of seeing the world. The cold, hard world of facts versus the vibrant, living world of fancy.
This quote from that iconic schoolroom scene right at the beginning is the perfect example. The teacher, Gradgrind, is all about facts. He asked this girl, Sissy Jupe, who grew up in a circus, literally grew up with horses, to define a horse. And she can't. But the star pupil Bitzer, he can rattle off this perfectly sterile scientific definition. And that, right there, is the philosophy of facts in action. It completely drains the life and the real meaning out of everything.
And get this, Leavis points out that Dickens even uses their physical appearances as powerful symbols. Sissy, who represents fancy and life, is dark-haired and dark-eyed. She, quote, receives a deeper color from the sun. But Bitzer, the product of facts, is pale and washed out, like the sun literally drains the little color he has. Dickens even describes him as so pale he would bleed white. It's this incredible poetic contrast between warm, messy humanity and a cold, mechanical way of being.
And this fight plays out in the settings too. On one side, you have Coketown. This is the city of facts. It's a place of interminable serpents of smoke, a place that's severely workful and just crushes the human spirit. But on the other side, you have Sleary Circus, the home of fancy, and it represents everything Coketown is not: art, spontaneity, kindness, and this remarkable gentleness and childishness that the utilitarian world just can't stand.
So after laying out all this evidence, piece by piece, Leavis arrives at his grand conclusion. He completely redefines what makes Dickens a genius, and he puts Hard Times right at the center of his argument. And this really gets to the heart of it. For Leavis, the power of Hard Times isn't in its size or its scope. Its genius doesn't come from creating a messy, sprawling world. No. Its genius lies in its focus, in its tight, poetic construction, and the powerful way it builds its argument, symbol by symbol.
Leavis really breaks down the specific tools Dickens uses to pull this off. He talks about the poetic power of the language itself, the incredible way the dialogue works, the rich symbolism we've been looking at, and this just astonishing richness of life you find in the writing. All these things, he says, work together in perfect harmony to create that concentrated, completely serious work of art.
To really drive the point home, Leavis brings in this fantastic quote from the philosopher George Santayana. The idea here is that what people often call exaggeration in Dickens isn't a flaw at all. It's actually the mark of his genius. It shows he's an artist who sees the world with a heightened reality, who can see and hear the essential truth of things that the rest of us might miss.
And in the end, Leavis's whole argument isn't just about a book from the 19th century. It leaves us with a really powerful question for our own time. In our world, an age that is so obsessed with data, with metrics, with cold, hard facts, are we in danger of forgetting the value of the horse riding? You know, the value of spontaneity, of creativity, of art, of all the things that are deeply, truly human. What do you think?